Let's talk about balls. There are so many types of balls. There are big ones, there are small ones, there are firm ones, there are soft ones. Some have stuff inside, some don't. It's hard to tell which ones are right for you. We're talking about juggling, by the way. So today I'm going to break down the different types of juggling balls that you're going to come across, what some of the variations are within those types, and my personal pros and cons for each to maybe help you decide which ones might be right for what you want to do. I'm not going to go in depth on like each specific brand of ball or anything like that. I do plan to make some videos like doing reviews. If I've already made those, I'll link a playlist in the description. If not, make sure you're subscribed so that you can be notified when they do come out. All right, starting with the most common, beanbags. Beanbag is pretty self-explanatory. It's some sort of fabric sewn together in a ball-like shape, filled with some sort of material, usually millet, a type of birdseed, or some sort of plastic pellet. It's probably the first type of juggling ball you encountered, and it's because they're really common. All right, let's talk about pros and cons. My personal ones, just opinions, relax. I think the biggest pro of a beanbag is how it gives. That makes them easier to hold more in one hand. You can squish them really nicely. On the catch, it's also nice because they tend to sort of squish a bit as they land, which helps even out that impact a little bit more. You can get them really affordably and easily. They're very accessible. And they also have a really nice price range variation. I think the variety is also really nice. You can get different materials, like a sort of suede versus a fake leather. You can get both, with some panels that are fake leather and some panels that are suede. Different colors. You can also mix and match panels. You can get some that are only 4 panels, 6 panels, 8 panels, or a whole bunch of panels. You can get triangular ones, you can get square ones, you can get weird ones. You're not going to find any more variety in any other type of ball than beanbags. Beanbags are usually the heaviest. They're going to have the most weight to them. And that's definitely a pro and a con depending on who you are. For a lot of people, they want a heavier ball. And the fact that they're heavy but also have some give, I think is an important combination, as opposed to one of the other balls that we're going to talk about in a little bit. You can also get that weight now customized with different ratios of plastic filling. Something I consider a pro is the lines, the visuals of it. You can see the rotation. You can see how it's moving more easily because there are clear lines in it. None of the other ball types have that really. Now going into cons, that same thing is a con for a lot of people. They look like beanbags. You can tell that they're not a solid ball. They have a slightly imperfect shape. They're never going to be perfectly round. And visually, yeah, it's a little more cluttered. I mentioned this a second ago, but the weight, to me, is a big con of beanbags. Especially when you start getting into 5 and more objects, you get tired more easily, it makes it harder to throw accurate high throws. And like I said, you can customize them and get them lighter now, but it's a fine line, because if they're too light, they can bounce out of your hand a lot easier. For the most part, I feel like beanbags still tend to be pretty heavy. Durability. Something like suede, it's gonna get dirty easier, and that texture is gonna kind of go away over time. Other materials start to fade with time. Usually with lower end beanbags, you'll see the seams will start to crack and split open, just because, you know, they're cheaper. With higher end beanbags, the material starts to get cracks in it. This final stuff definitely does it. It starts ripping apart really quickly, and then you end up with this just horrible, ugly, floppy bag. I don't like those. It's just the nature of fabric. Something I consider a con with beanbags is that they usually come too full. They're really tight when you first get them. They eventually do get broken in and you start to get, you know, more of what you want. I personally hate that. I feel like a ball should feel the way that I want it to feel without having to put in hours and hours of wear on it. It's one of the things I took in mind when I designed the prop-worthy balls. You know, they intentionally have some slack to begin with so that they feel broken in right away. And most of the higher end ones like Sportco, G-balls, and Juggle Quip will allow you to customize the filling amount. The only problem with that though is that you have to know what you want. And when somebody says 90% full, it's hard to really know what that is unless you've tried it. But in my opinion, all of them are better if they're underfilled. On the flip side of that, over time they also start to kind of lose their shape. They can get floppy. I don't actually have any of those right now. The fact that their shape changes at all over time, to me, is a con. The filling can be a con. Millet, which is very common with a lot of beanbags because it feels so good, it's organic, it's good for the environment, it's affordable, it's very common in beanbags. There's a couple problems with it. First, you can't really get it wet. If you put this in water, the millet's either gonna like swell up, get some sort of mold or something. It's just not good for it because it's a seed. You don't wanna get it wet. That limits how waterproof these are, right? You can't submerge them. If I wanna clean them, I have to like spot clean them. With millet, you also have to be careful where you travel. As far as I know, Australia is pretty much where this is a problem. I think it's fine to buy them and have them sent there, but I think the issue comes when you start traveling in and out of that country. You might get them confiscated. They'll probably rip them open, throw them away, because they don't like you to bring in bird seeds. For some people, it's a very small amount, but some people also have millet allergies. I'm one of those people. So over time, if you have a millet beanbag, that millet will start to break down and it'll just release little fine dust into the air. You won't notice it unless you're allergic to it, and you'll start sneezing a little bit more than you normally would. The good alternative to those are beanbags filled with split pea. Can't find these a lot. Sportco used to offer them. I'm not sure if they still do. You can ask. The Propworthy balls, we have split pea ones for this reason. They still have that organic feel, less like the plastic. You can also take them to Australia, and they don't make you allergic. The good thing is that nowadays we have these plastic filling alternatives. Plastic is definitely more waterproof. You don't have to worry too much if it gets wet. I don't love plastic filling. I just don't like the way it feels, but for a lot of people, it's probably not going to make enough of a difference to matter. Some types of juggling balls are also still not super waterproof, even with plastic filling. Ultra leather, it depends on the kind, but it shouldn't get super wet and then dry too many times, I'm guessing. Juggle Quips are the exception to this. This is completely waterproof, it has plastic inside, and this material can be thrown in the washer and doesn't seem to change its consistency at all. So that's great. The downside is you're spending a whole lot more for this. Yes, you're so pretty. All right, that's beanbags. That was a big section because there's a lot of it because it's the biggest one. Second type, Russians. Sometimes called Ukrainians or Kievs. I will call them Russians for the sake of this video because that's usually what they're called. But a Russian ball has a shell of some kind and it is filled with some sort of material, but not all of the way, usually about a third of the way up. And the material is usually sand or salt or something along those lines. When it comes to Russians, there are two main types. There are hard shell Russians, and that's what it sounds like. The shell is hard, it is rigid. Then you have the other side of that spectrum, which is a soft shell Russian. Soft shell Russian, the shell is soft. There are also these playpen style Russians that are made with playpen balls that you would see at like a McDonald's play center. That's like this. These are kind of in between. I consider them a hard shell Russian, not super soft, but have quite a thin shell that has some give to it. Let's talk pros and cons because there are a lot. This is a very controversial ball. Usually when you meet jugglers, they'll either love them or they'll hate them, and they will gladly tell you why. The main pro that people will talk about is usually what they call the Russian effect. That material has like a dead drop to it. So the shell will hit and then that material will like extra land in your hand and really solidify it. That's usually what people mean when they're talking about the Russian effect, and as a result, that makes it very good for catches. The catch really tends to sit in your hand really nicely. It's also really good for things like stalls, foot catches, tricks that involve hitting the body and coming back down, like BBB or pinball. Significantly easier with a Russian. Now to me, the biggest pro of a Russian ball is the weight. They're light. They usually weigh somewhere between 80 and 100 grams, as opposed to a beanbag that's usually like 110 to 140 grams, if not more. Russians are light, and for a lot of juggling, that's really important, especially 5 or more objects. When you're throwing and catching a ball hundreds of times, the weight of a beanbag, you're gonna start feeling it. It's gonna start fatiguing your muscles a lot quicker than the weight of a Russian. And like I said, you can get a lighter beanbag to help offset that weight problem, but you don't have that added Russian effect that I talked about. You can go down in size on a beanbag, but now you have a tinier ball that's harder to catch. It can slip through your fingers a lot easier. To me, this is the best part about Russians. Bigger ball, easy to catch, easy to see. It doesn't weigh a lot, so it doesn't fatigue your muscles, but it still has a dead drop catch. And it's especially important with high throws to get them high. Just allow you to throw higher and more accurately with less effort. Similarly, the catch, it's also less impact on your body. When you catch a beanbag, the fabric is gonna catch some of that energy and make it a little less impactful. But for the most part, you're still getting hit by most of that weight all at once, and you're having to counter it and slow it down and then throw it again. And you might not notice it, but that is fatiguing. It's also harder on your joints, like your wrists and your elbows. When it comes to a Russian ball, 1, there's less weight, so you're not gonna have to put nearly as much effort into reversing. 2, that material now gets to use all of this space to disperse, to counter that kinetic energy when it catches. So it's not gonna hit your hand nearly as hard all at once, which means it's easier to naturally slow down and reverse without putting extra stress on your joints. That's my opinion. Another big pro are the visuals. I think this is a huge one for a lot of people. A nice round object that's gonna stay round the entire time, and it's gonna pop really nicely on stage because it's so clean. There are also a lot of different colors that you can get Russians in with different finishes. You can get metallic ones. There's all sorts of variations that way, and they all look gorgeous. When people ask me what balls I'm using in my videos, it's almost always a Russian ball. Another big benefit, a lot of them are pretty water resistant, if not waterproof. Easy to clean, easy to wash off. You don't have to worry too much about them being like in a puddle on accident or something. They can be more durable, especially for outdoor use. They will scratch up and the shine will disappear or whatever, but a lot of Russians are gonna be pretty durable. Big Pro, easy to make. You can literally buy playpen balls on the internet pretty cheap. You can buy a whole bunch at once. All you have to do, put a hole in them, fill them with like sand or salt a third of the way, and then hot glue them back up, and you've got a homemade Russian ball that honestly works pretty dang well. Another pro, they're very consistent. If I order this ball today, and then in a year I order the same ball, it's probably gonna be the same ball. The shells don't change, the material amount is the same. There's not a lot of room for inconsistency. As opposed to a beanbag, which is almost always gonna have some variation. It might be something as simple as the fabric color changed a little bit, or the filling amount is off by a gram or two. The higher end, like Juggling, claims that this isn't a problem, but you're putting a lot more money in to do that. Which leads me to one of the other big pros of a Russian ball. They're super affordable. Like even the high-end ones aren't that expensive. When it comes to soft Russians, one of the benefits is also all those things I mentioned, but it also has a lot of give. You can hold more in one hand, and you still have some of that nice give that makes it more comfortable like a beanbag. Okay, cons. The biggest con that you're gonna hear people talk about when they crap on Russians is that they can wiggle in the air. If you have like a significant amount of spin on your throw, they roll off your hand, they can subtly sort of wiggle in the air. I have to try really hard to make this happen, so I'm not sure how this is a big problem for people, but people complain about it. In my opinion, this will go away very quickly. Typically with any of these balls, if you're used to one and you switch to the other, it's gonna feel terrible, especially when it comes to Russians versus beanbags. If you're used to juggling beanbags and you pick up a Russian, you're gonna feel like suddenly you can't juggle, and that must mean that the Russians are terrible. It doesn't. It's just that your brain is used to one, and there are some subtleties in how you do each, and it has to figure out how to do that. In my experience, it figures it out really quickly. Don't worry about the wiggle too much or any of that. I don't think that's a good thing to base your opinion on, because it will go away. Now, some actual cons are the size. This is a big ball. While that is a pro in a lot of ways that I just mentioned, with being easier to catch, it is harder to hold, especially on the start. My hands just have to reach a lot more, and that can feel really uncomfortable for people. You can get different sizes, which is nice. You can get smaller versus, the larger, and that can help, counter that a bit. But even then, the sizes are pretty limited. You're not gonna be getting a ton of variation in sizes like you would with a beanbag. These are some of my favorite Russians. These are Rad Factors. I really like them, but they do crack at the seams pretty frequently. Seems like that happens more in cold weather, but it happens, and that's a bummer. Some Russians have a problem that when you travel in a plane and the air pressure changes a lot, they can get these like dents in them, and it'll just be stuck like that. They'll eventually go back to normal, but by that time you might be back from your trip. It happens with Rad Factors, it happens with a lot of the homemade ones. It can happen with the soft Russians, but the nice thing is you can just pop out that plug, let it refill, put it back in. As far as I know, cathedrals don't do it, or certainly don't do it as much. I haven't actually tested it, but that's what I've heard. And I know Norwix also, I think, put a little hole in theirs, so it also doesn't do it. If you have homemade ones and it does that, you can just poke it with a needle. Either way, it's a thing that happens with Russians, and that sucks. Another downside, they can roll, certainly. Anytime you get a ball that's more of a ball, it's gonna roll a bit more. They don't roll as bad as something like a stage ball, which I will talk about in a bit, but they roll more than a beanbag, typically. The fact that they're bigger is also kind of a con in storage. When I'm traveling with beanbags, I can fit a lot of beanbags in a small space, but for that same amount of Russians, I'm taking up a lot more space in my bag. So it's definitely something to consider. Soft-shelled Russians have a special problem, and that is that the material, this plastic, it absorbs any color that it's next to for a long amount of time. So if this is sitting next to this ball, they're gonna start absorbing each other's color. Or if I just leave this on a dresser, it's gonna start getting little marks on it. cannot get them out. It's not a matter of cleaning it. The plastic itself has now changed its color and it's permanent. It doesn't ruin the ball. It's not usually that noticeable from a distance or anything like that. The solution is that you have to keep them in their own bag with the same color, not touching anything for very long. That does not happen with hard shell Russians. Like I've never seen it happen. This type of plastic just doesn't absorb them the same way. To be fair, ultra leather stuff also does this, but it still isn't like as noticeable as it is with these plastic ones. It happens really quickly and really noticeably. The last con is also a pro, and that's the noise. This noise can be either really great or really annoying. For me, I really like it because it's another sense that's giving me feedback, especially on things like rhythm. You'll be able to hear if something's off. If you're somebody who needs to be quieter when they juggle, if you have people around you all the time that find this noise really annoying, these aren't gonna be so good. One of the other cons to Russians, the fact that they're called Russians makes like searching for them really uncomfortable or difficult. Google gets really confused really fast, and I'm sure that you end up on some sort of list somewhere from the government because you're looking up Russians too much. All right, I think that's all for those two. I had to cover the most on them because they're the most talked about. Now we're gonna get into some more niche types of juggling balls, which should go a lot faster. All right, this ball. This is an MMX ball. It's made by Play Juggling. I love that company. I don't like this ball. An MMX ball is basically similar to the Play Russian ball. It's the same shell, but it's completely filled with millet instead of just partially filled with something. There is a little bit of give, but it's still a solid ball. I see a lot of people, especially online, recommend them. It seems to be less common for like professionals or high-end jugglers, and I think that says a lot about it. The pros of them are it's a solid ball. It's nice and pretty. It has a lot of colors, just like the Play Russians do. It's got that ball shape, but it also has weight, like a beanbag. It's heavy, for sure. I think this plug is technically not waterproof, but I've taken these in the water, like literally in the pool, and they're fine. They're very durable. These will last you forever. Literally, you'll never need to buy another ball again. I have another set of these that I've had for 20 years. They're still going strong. These will never die. It's like having a cockroach as a pet. They're super durable, it'll last a long time, but like they're probably better pets. So clearly I have some cons for these balls. Let's go over those. It's so heavy, like a beanbag. But on the flip side, it doesn't have that give, how a beanbag will sort of stretch and limit that impact. MMX does not do that. It's just a solid ball that's heavy and it's gonna hit your hand like a belly flop. It hurts. I don't like it. Yes, you can squeeze them, but they don't naturally give. They roll away. I sometimes see people online talking about how they don't, like that's one of the pros. I don't know what planet they're on, what gravity they're using. These are a solid round ball. They're going to roll. It's like a bocce ball. It's got some weight to it, so I guess it's not gonna roll as bad as like a stage ball, but it does roll. It has that same problem that all of these like thicker plastic shells have. If you leave it next to something, it's going to absorb that material. I also don't love the feeling of this material, and for some reason it bugs me more with an MMX than it does with something like the SRX. I'm not sure why. It's probably something with how I'm juggling them or where I'm doing it or whatever, so it's probably a con for both, but I especially notice it with these. A lot of people say that they're kind of sticky, and I agree. And over time, especially the MMXs that I've used, they get like kind of grimy. You can clean them obviously, but they still tend to have this like film to them that I don't love. Yeah, basically, I don't really get why people recommend them. I think because they're clearly juggling balls. They're designed for juggling. So when you get it, you feel like, right, I've upgraded to like a real ball. A lot of people buy them as their first real ball, and because they last forever, you just never need to get another one, so those people never get to try something that's good. Obviously, I don't like this ball. I have a bias with that, so take everything with a grain of salt that I say. I'm not trying to like crap on your opinion if you like this ball. I know some people do. I just think that there are better alternatives for pretty much everything that you might want out of this. The only time I can really see this being the right ball for you is if you need something that's literally gonna last you forever. You're doing a low number of objects, like 3, maybe 4. You want something really heavy, and maybe you're into like contact juggling, and you don't want a Sil-X or a stage ball that I'm gonna talk about next. You still want that extra weight. I think maybe then this is probably good for you. But if you're just looking for a real juggling ball that has some weight to it, that is durable, go with a Juggle Quip. It's just gonna be better. And if you want something that looks like a ball and you want to feel like a juggler, try a Russian. And if you don't love the Russian effect, but you still want like a ball that's a little heavier, Play allows you to custom make balls. So you can get the same shell as an MMX, but only fill it halfway with millet. You're still gonna get that weight and that ball and that durability, but you're gonna have a little more give than you do with this solid rock of a ball. All right, speaking of play, Sil-X is basically like a Russian, but it's filled with silicone. Sound like your stomach makes when you drink too much water and then you gurgle, that's a Sil-X ball. Pros, it has a nice shell that has give. It also has two different styles. You can get the Sil-X and the Sil-X Lite. The Sil-X is a little bit thicker, so it doesn't have as much give, and the Sil-X Lite has a bit more. It's just thinner. So that's nice that there's that variation, and depending on what you want them for, I can see you going either way. The thicker shell does have a bit more weight to it, which is nice. The thinner shell has a lot of that give, so it feels kind of like a lighter beanbag. One of the biggest pros is that it's like a Russian, so it's lighter than a beanbag and it's a solid ball with some weight that has give and like dead weight to it, a little bit, not a ton, but unlike a Russian, it's good for contact juggling. I'm not good at contact juggling, but these are good for that. They definitely have more roll potential than something like an S or X. It's just gonna fight you a lot more because of that weight. The trade-off is that this does not have as much of that Russian effect, that dead drop. The trade-off again is that it doesn't have much of that wiggle. Some cons, I've heard that the silicone can dry up. I've never seen it happen, but people have told me that it does over time. I can't confirm or deny it, but I wanted to mention it. They have that same material that can absorb colors and marks just like the other ones. They kind of have that same like sticky feeling. The thicker shell feels stickier to me, which is maybe why the MMX feels like that. Yeah, they've got that like sticky texture and that kind of grimy feel over time. Because it's liquid, you gotta be careful when you fly with it. I've learned this the hard way. I tried to carry them on the plane and the plane said no because they're liquid. Duh. So I ended up having to throw them away because I didn't have enough time to go back and whatever. Be careful with that. If you get these, probably need to check them on the plane. Stage balls. Sometimes called contact balls, sometimes called stage contact balls. Stage balls are literally just plastic balls, pretty thick plastic, and there's nothing inside them. They are completely hollow. Just empty balls. They don't have pretty much any give. They're not the same shell as an SRX or a Sil-X. The pros, they're beautiful, they're shiny. You can get them in actually pretty different sizes. This is like a glow-in-the-dark one. Different materials. You've got the shiny versus the matte. They're wonderful for contact juggling. The big ones especially are pretty much almost exclusively used now for contact juggling, especially like the heavy ones. Oh yeah. There are people who use like this size and this size for just toss juggling. It's almost always 3 and it's a very small niche, but I do know people who do it. I think that they do it because there is so much responsiveness. Because there's nothing inside them and they're not very heavy, you can like manipulate them very quickly. They also don't have any give, which for some people I think is a pro because they have that nice solid manipulation ability, like for contact juggling or stuff. They're really durable. I've never seen a contact ball break. You can wash them, they're waterproof, there's no holes, it's just a big rubber ball. Biggest con is that they're really light, and unlike Russians, which are also light, they don't have that dead weight Russian effect, so they just bounce out of your hand. They're light and hard to catch. It's kind of like a glorified tennis ball, if you've ever tried to juggle those. They feel very similar. The material obviously will start to absorb that stuff the same way all of the other plastic balls will. Those are just there forever. That sucks. They're a little sticky, like especially the shiny ones. They just have like a sticky material. It's not easy to release them. They roll like crazy. You drop them, you'll be like, where did it go? It rolled away because it's a ball. It's just a round ball. When they hit, they like completely bounce off each other. And they'll just go wherever. The other play balls don't do that as much. They'll sort of just dead weight down. Russians also do that. Beanbags actually surprisingly bounce a bit more. I think that they're like in the middle. Why does that matter? Well, when you're juggling, there's gonna be collisions and it's nice to be able to recover from them. And when they just like freak out, you're not gonna be able to. Biggest negative, they're just hard to catch. I think at the time they were needed because you needed something that was prettier than a beanbag on stage. If you're looking for something like that, nowadays you can go with a Russian or a Sil-X ball or an MMX ball if you want. Stage balls are less useful nowadays. So Which ones should you buy? It depends on what you need, how much money you have, things like that. Go back, watch the pros and cons of all of the different things, and figure out what feels best for your needs. And I will say, just because a beanbag costs more doesn't necessarily make it better. Just because this might not last as long as this, doesn't make it worse. They're different balls. It depends on what you want. If you get juggle clips, get them underfilled. I like 80%. The only ones I really don't recommend are typically like the really crappy ones on Amazon, like Speevers. That's just a company in China that doesn't juggle. They don't really know anything. They're fine. For the same price, I think you can get something from another company, from actual jugglers, support smaller businesses, and get a higher quality product. Don't use like foot bags like this. This was my very first juggling ball. I got it at the dollar store. Don't use these aren't juggling balls. I personally don't like these vinyl ones very much, the normal size. They're not bad, I just think they're kind of tacky looking, and the material stretches too much, and they start to feel kind of floppy for me. I don't really like the plug and play, and I don't really like the MMX, obviously. And the stage balls, I think, have a very specific purpose that you should only get if you know that you want that. But for the most part, anything else, I think you're gonna be fine. None of them are gonna break your bank. If you get some and you don't love them, you can eventually get something else. Hopefully this overview gives you an idea and it gets you started in understanding at least the variety that's out there and why you might use one over the other. When you go to a festival or something, look for these types of balls. Try them out. Now you'll know what they actually mean and you'll have a little bit more knowledge when you are trying them to figure out what's right for you. Also, all of this information is available in written form on my website, The Juggler's Guide. You can find that and a lot of other helpful resources at jugglersguide.com. Like I said, I do want to do individual reviews on all of the like specific balls themselves so that I can give you a better breakdown of what actually makes that ball that ball. Let me know if there's something else you want me to review or talk about or something else in juggling that's confusing you, and I'll try to make a video about it. If you learned something from this, do me a favor and at least like the video. It helps with the stupid algorithm stuff. And if you are interested in juggling enough to watch a video like this, give me a subscribe. All right, that's it. Cool. Good luck. I have to go put all of these away now. Fun fact, this is the second time I'm filming this because I filmed it and then when I went to edit it, I realized that I just rambled for way too long. So I'm trying to make it more concise. So that was me being more concise. So you can imagine what yesterday's was. All right,